Hey guys, back with another Echoing Thoughts podcast here, episode number 78. Class tiers ranking. It's going to be a two-parter. Part one is going to be the bottom half, more like the first, let's say, 25 classes. And I really wanted to talk about each class individually just a little bit. So this one's obviously a little bit longer. And thank you to everyone in the Discord that was a part of the polls, a part of the discussions, helping me learn more about these classes. One of my favorite things about the class tiers ranking that I tried to do, especially this time, was to learn more about those underplayed classes, right? Classes I couldn't find content on, classes that maybe there aren't a lot of big time whales or mains in NA. I tried to, network with people and reach out and really just try to get more input. And just because right now it's a month in, right, we just don't have the data, right? I think everyone wants like the strict raw, the line counts, the damage and covert embossing. And I think realistically, it's been too soon. It's been about 5 weeks since the rebalance. And also, damage is just hard. Each content is very different, right? And there's not one class that really excels in all aspects. Like, for example, Night Lords in bossing are insane, but they may not be the best in covert. They may not be the best in Mulong. They may not be the best in solo content. I think everyone has to have their own sort of opinions or criteria for what makes the best classes. And I know in the polls, I talked about everyone's top 10 classes. Thank you. We had about 1,000 votes for that poll. It was great. We had great results there. And I think my chart, my top 10 was slightly different. There was a few here and there that were the same, but for the most part, it was pretty different to the general public, which I think is very good. And I hope that it's going to shed light on some classes that are very unknown, right? Some very, very good classes that I personally had a hard time putting in my top 10 until I had the discussions, even though the numbers and the data kind of says one thing, right? And because for me personally, and I think for everybody, right, it's all about DPS. And when I did a poll, it was all about DPS, specifically in team content. That's what about half the people wanted to see, right? Believe that, what separates the SS tier is team content. And for me, one step further, what makes the best classes kind of separate themselves, because we can all agree that line counts are pretty similar. The meta currently is favored towards classes that can surround their big bursts, their V skills around Defense Match 4, right? Short cooldowns, 30-second cooldowns, short bursts, kind of use it on demand are the meta. Ice Lightning Mages, Phantoms, classes like that really can, especially because the endgame bosses right now have a lot of kind of invulnerable immune phases where they fly up, they're unable to do damage, and so it favors these sort of classes as well, right? So that is the meta. And for me, doing DPS is about a few things, right? And it's about having those high peaks. I really think the best DPS classes, the best classes overall, have the high peaks. So if there's like a short burst window, if the runs are short, if everything goes perfectly, great team run overall, they're going to be at the top of the charts, right? They're going to hit huge PRs. Like I seen a Wild Hunter do about 350 build DPM, Sephi do 250 build DPM in hard Damien in these fast explosive runs, right? Night Lords, Demon Slayers, Evans, I've seen videos of them do insane 300 build plus. Ice Lightning Mages do 300 build plus in Lucid when it's the short maximum uptime boss runs. But I think also one thing that I really put emphasis on for DPS was when shit hits the fan, right? When it's not a perfect run, are the top classes still able to produce? And there's some factors into that, right? And I assumed that everyone was there was the baseline that everyone was at full 60s, 60 mil plus cap and endgame gear wise as the baseline, as well as the best players playing the class, right? Get those out as variables, kind of, that is just the status quo. And so with that in mind, I really wanted to put value in classes that can sort of be the last man standing, right? I think that's very important. That can essentially stand there and do DPS, right? Can survive mechanics, has tools in their toolkit, and I talk about that a lot. Tools in their toolkit to counter mechanics, to do DPS, to, just not have to run away, not have to, stay alive, essentially, right? And I think that iframes, self-heals, mobility, those things matter when it's so close as far as DPS, right? Because when, we've all been runs right now, the support right now is nerfed. Bishop reses, we're getting a lot of Pally single reses, Time Leap, you cannot Bishop res, Sia's Hourglass, Shade Splits, the support is not there right now in the current meta. So even more so, perfect runs are a dime a dozen, even for the best classes, even for the best teams. It's very challenging. And so I like to kind of have that criteria in mind where DPS, yes, having the high peaks when everything is perfect is important, but also when, it's just a bad run, or it's not a perfect run, but it's still a clear, are these classes able to still produce DPS? And I think with that in mind, there are certain classes that are a tier above as far as, rankings, tiers, just a cut above. And you'll see in my rankings, I labeled my tiers as B tier, A tier, S tier, and kind of levels within that, right? There's multiple tiers, but I just wanted to emphasize that there are no bad classes. There just are none. The line counts are there. Like Ice Lightning Mages have the lowest line counts and have the highest covert score, right? Like there's just so much. It's just such a unique time in the meta that I think that some of the maybe lower tier classes maybe just don't have that representation at the top tier. So it's hard for us to sort of, have any data on it, have any insight on it, and kind of just using our basic understanding of the class and what is doing well right now. So without further ado, class tiers ranking, 2 parts. This is part 1, starting from the bottom, work our way up, and then part 2 will be sort of in the middle, the S tiers and the SS tier, and sort of the S plus tier, and then the 1 of 1. So thanks again for everyone that was in the Discord, helping out with the polls. Had a lot of fun, and let's get into it. All right, so we're back, class tier rankings, and you can see here is the tiers that I laid out, right? So I got a B plus tier, which is the lowest tier, just one grade below tier. So I named it this way just so to reiterate and emphasize that there are no bad classes, no bad tiers. I think a B plus tier, I would take a B plus any day of the week, right? And so that was what I was trying to say with this, was that these classes in the bottom tiers, A minus tier, still an A. A tier, support nerf tier. The A plus tier can easily beat the S tier. S tier will outlive the S plus tier. The S plus tier is the glass cannon tier, and the SS tier is the 1 of the 1. That's the best class, I think, hands down. And it's probably not the class that you think that I would have chose. But I made these tiers to kind of showcase that there are a lot of very good classes. A tiers, A minus tiers are still very good classes, and I've seen classes in this tier hold aggro in Damien, top the charts in Damien, top the charts in Lucid, do very well in DPS and team content. So it's no shade on them, but it's just, there are just so many good classes you're going to see. It is extremely hard to just differentiate within the tiers and choosing tiers, differentiating within the tiers, and so forth, so on and so forth. It was just extremely challenging. But I think the easiest tier was the bottom tier, the B plus tier, because these classes I felt like they're just missing something, right? They did well, they do well. It's just hard to give them an A, right? In terms of grading, as far as like, I also think there's not a lot of data on them at the full, again, 60 mil plus cap threshold in team content. I haven't seen it. Trust me, Ho Young, I have not seen it. Kana, I tried. Right, we got some 40s mil cap, but nothing, at a tier above. Adele's Marksman, Cadena, Angelic Busters, all the same. And I think what makes them challenging, based on the knowledge that I have and talking to people that main these classes, is that their DPS is probably pretty good. I've seen Slain, the Marksman Hunter, finish podium in Lucid, right? Surrounded by a lot of other equally geared people. I've seen Kanas do well. I've seen Angelic Busters, Adele's. I haven't seen Cadenas. There's just not enough data. But I believe that they are better than what the general public thinks. There just isn't someone playing it, showcasing it. And if there is, send it to me, please. I would love to be wrong about it. I would love to put them higher. I would love to say that I was wrong and these classes are better than I thought. But I tried to look there. I tried to ask people. There was just not anything, that convinced me otherwise in this current meta, right? And I think they also lack, just, if they're not lacking DPS, they're lacking survivability. They just don't have a great toolkit. Adele's, Angelic Busters, I think they both have one iframe. Marksman may have an iframe. Cadenas, not too sure. Ho Young, they have that short iframe, but they're just lacking, again, a tier below the rest of the classes. And then the next, sorry, I forgot to put Ho Young in there, or Hayato. Not enough data. This is what it is. Looks sick though. Excited to see. Saw that Absolab weapon, level 60, katana. Pretty sick. Pretty sick. And then the next tier. So there's 43 classes, right? This is what you could probably say is like the bottom 10, the bottom 30 to 43. But the A- tier, still an A. Still very good. I've heard great things about these classes. Arc. I just watched a video of a hard Damien aggro. Arc. Carrying. Right? Corsair. I just watched the Corsair. Top the charts in phase 1 in Lucid. Great burst. Great damage. And finished, I think, podium in their run. Kaiser. Let's go to Battle Mage first. Battle Mage, I mentioned I love their V4 skill. I know their burst is pretty good. I ran a hard Damien clear with the Battle Mage that finished top 3 and consistently over like dual blades, over other classes that are pretty well known, over me on the Phantom. If you saw that video of me playing my Phantom, that was there was a Battle Mage in the top 3 and consistently at the top doing damage, consistent damage. They have their party bubbles as well for survivability. And so Battle Mages, I think, are very, very good. I just think they're lacking iframes, self-heals, survivability. And if things go wrong, like I mentioned for the criteria, if things go wrong, they're sitting ducks. They just have a hard time kind of being that last one standing. And they don't have really many options in their, tools in their toolkit to kind of deal with it, right? Kaisers. I did the questionnaire. One of the questions was, what are the most underrated classes? Kaisers. I got quite a bit of people saying Kaisers the most underrated. Probably right. I think that what I love about them is they can be tanky, defensive stance, and just tank everything, take reduced damage. They got nice teleports. They do well in clearing bombs in Lotus, in Lucid. Their DPS, I'm sure, is probably arguably better. Again, can probably beat the other majority of the classes with the right gear, with great mechanics. I just think Warriors are in a very good spot, right? And it was hard for me to put the Kaiser on the tier above with all the other Warriors that I have that you'll see, because they don't stand out as far as DPS to overcompensate for like the lack of iframes, the lack of self-heals that the other Warriors have. And that was ultimately what it came down to, right? It's not saying that Kaisers aren't good, they're not great, but if they don't have kind of help, or if they don't have things kind of working out perfectly, they just don't have, they're kind of just a tier below, right? Kinesis, the same thing, right? I've seen Kinesis do great damage. I've showcased them doing great damage, DPS, great mobbers. I just have this thing for mages that is hard for me to kind of overcome, because they're just squishy. It's just what it comes down to. And in this game where like HP is such a huge factor, and kind of being able to survive on your own with iframes or self heals or whatever you call leeching or lifesteal, other classes have it and you don't, and the DPS is pretty much the same, or your DPS doesn't stand out, isn't like S plus tier, it's just hard for me to put you above some of these other classes. No shade on Kinesis. Kinesis can do good damage. It's just they're an A-. Very good. I'll take an A- any day of the week. And Xenon. I heard they have 3 iframes. I learned a little bit longer cooldowns, short, but I think Xenons are, again, they have good burst. I heard that 9 seconds is kind of their burst window, which is kind of what the meta is as far as DPS right now, trying to pairing it Defense Smash 4. So I think Xenons can be higher, right? They are stronger than most people think. They are probably underrated. I tried to search for Xenons that were doing well at the 60 plus mil cap. Couldn't find them. I've run with a few Xenons. Again, I just think it comes down to consistency, right? It just comes down to being able to do your DPS consistently when things go perfect. I'm sure they're very great. They can be very great. They have the potential to do great burst, great damage. But when things aren't ideal, which is what, 3/4 of the runs are, right? When they're not perfect right now in this current meta, how can they handle it? A-. They're an A-. Still very good. All right, so that's all I got for A- tier. Again, this is the bottom tier, but look, I think all these classes, I've seen all these classes do extremely well in content. It's no shade on them, right? But there's just a lot of great classes. Just straight up, there are a lot of great classes. And I wouldn't be upset at you if you thought that like Kaisers belonged here, Battle Mages belonged here, Arcs here, Xenons, whatever it is, right? This is just my list. And I'll be honest with you. When I look at this list and I see it tomorrow when it posts or whenever it posts, I'm probably going to think that it's wrong. With more, like, every time I've done this, I've changed it, I've revised it, I liked it, disliked it. It was just hard for me there's just a lot of great classes, simple as that. But we'll get into it. There's a lot more classes to go, 30 more plus classes-ish, and a lot of great classes to talk about. All right, we just went through the bottom 2 tiers. Cadena, Marksman, Adele, Angelic Buster, Kana, Ho Young, Hayato, kind of the B+ tier. A- tier. Art Kaiser, Battle Mage, Corsair, Kinesis, Xenon. Kind of just unfortunately, the bottom of their classes, the class categories, but still very, very good, right? But now we're going to go into like the middle A tier, right? The A and A+ tier. And I think that it's fitting, right? Because some of these classes in the A tier, all of these classes in the A tier were in the top 10, top 15 of the polls. Shows how great these classes are, what people think of them. But I just think that they are slightly overrated. Talking to the best of their classes, Mira, Primo, Warren, these classes were just slightly overvalued, right? And I think that the general community still believes that they're very good, and they are, right? You always need a bishop. It's always valuable to have a bishop, a shade, and a seal. We have all of them. It's better to have them than to not have them. But I think it would be a little bit short-sighted, or I guess like it'd just be incorrect to assume that they are still the SS tier. These three classes, I think, in my last ranking were in the top 5 because support skills were so valuable. Hourglass, Shade Split, their crit res, bishops, party res, benediction shell, all of those things were so valuable. And in the current meta with the current changes, it's just not, unfortunately, right? They got nerfed kind of hard. And it didn't just affect their team content, but it also affected like the Shades solo content. Covert, Mulong, Split was a big part of their scores and their DPS and their solo content. That nerf, huge. Warren, Sias, Hourglasses. It's not just the Hourglass buff, right? I think people don't understand enough about Sia, and I personally do not. But when talking to Warren about this, the rotation is impossible to do in bossing content. It just is. The 60% or majority of their damage is through their wolves. And I think Nexon didn't really know how to rebalance the class because they had nothing to really go off of. Being a mobile specific class, that they put a lot of emphasis into the V skills, right? Kind of in the meta, but what they failed to do with Sias, what they did with other classes, for other classes, they condensed the burst into shorter time frames, like things like Night Lord's Shuriken, Phantom's Luck of the Draw. Think of like Paladin's Grand Guardian, right? It's like a 6-second window of burst. Sia's is 23 seconds. And so just then right there, it's impossible to get 23 seconds, like we talked about, of pure just uptime DPS on a boss consistently. And that's the key, right? You can get 23 seconds here and there, maybe once out of the run, twice out of the run, but every run, at every time, there's no way to perfectly do that consistently every single time. So if that is majority of Sia's damage being lost, just kind of based on bossing movements, based on RNG, based on where the boss teleports and things like that, that is just frustrating, right? And I think that's why they've dropped down so far for me and for the people that main it, right? They would be okay. Well, I don't want to speak for them, but I feel like the Hourglass change was kind of necessary, right? Understandable. But the hard part is when the DPS, like classes that got support nerfs, got a DPS boost. Sia's kind of got the worst of both, right? Their rotation's impossible and their support got diminished. And so I think that is what is putting them in the bottom half of the classes for me. And I think Sia mains as well feel the same way with their frustration from day one of feedback post this rebalance. And then we get to bishops. Bishops were top 3 in our polls? Love bishops. Rather have them than not have them, but I think their damage is being overblown. And I mentioned this in my last video. Bishop's DPS and burst is very good. It's much better than what it used to be. But it's still not, compared to other classes, it's above average at best. Barely above average at best. Right? But relative where they were, it's significantly 2.5, 3 times X burst. Pre-V4, pre-rebalance. But relative to the rest of the classes, it's above average. Right? Which is totally fine if Bishop's support was where it was before, but they got nerfed with their support, right? You cannot time leap your Bishop res anymore. It's actually huge. right? And so, yes, their DPS is noticeably better. Same cap, Bishop can compete. It's not going to be the best, but now that they've lost their ability to res multiple times in a fight, essentially, in a 5-minute fight, you may get one Bishop res. You got to use it wisely. A 5-minute fight, right? That's insane. That's why they're in this A tier. Rather have them than not, but they're pretty replaceable. Phantoms, Paladin res, Phantoms can take their res, do more DPS, more survivability, right? Like they are just where they are, A tier, but not as great as people think. And then Shade, finally, same thing, right? Time Leap, or Shade Split was a massive part in solo content, team content. It got nerfed to 2 minutes cooldown. In 3-minute fights, in 4-minute fights, you get it twice. Compared to, I think it was every 30, 45 seconds you could use it. It's just massive, right? In all aspects for Shades. Their burst definitely got better with V4, but not like Bishops, not significantly better. Not in comparison to other classes better. Above average. About where we have them. They lost the support, got a little bit more DPS. You could argue that they're top half, right? You could argue that they're in the A+ tier. I wouldn't disagree with you, right? But hearing from the people that main these classes, they feel like maybe I'm undervaluing them slightly, but they're definitely not the top tiers as the majority of people think, right? As a class by itself. So these 3 classes kind of still very good, still an A tier. I'll take an A. Right? Not like these people are re-rolling from their classes, but they just wish probably a little bit more tuning, a little bit more, just a little bit more, right? And then they'll easily be back up where they were previously, right? And then now the A+ tier. All right, we're back with the A+ tier, the tier that can easily beat the S tier. And this is the tier that has the most classes in it. And reminder, right? These classes are what I would say are just a tier above and just a tier below, right? So I kind of grouped them in with that mindset. So I've got 3 archers, Bowmaster, Wind Archer, Pathfinders. All felt very good in their own way. I've gotten rave reviews. I've seen amazing content and DPS and results from all 3 classes. Bowmasters, some believe, I've been told, very smart people, are underrated, much better than people think, because they have lifesteal, right? Good survivability. Mirage apparently is a heaven's door. They can attack on the move, and their DPS is just overall better, right? With the rebalance and the V4, their DPS is good, right? Wild Hunters, kind of the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but their playstyle is more burst heavy. They don't have the best survivability. Kind of the same as Pathfinders, where both of these classes have pretty good burst, noticeable burst, can top the charts, can significantly do a lot of burst in a short amount of time type of damage. But they're just slightly below some of the other, just a tier below other archers in one way or another, whether it's burst or DPS. But I think that, again, these classes can easily beat the tier above. No doubt about it. The right gear, with the right mechanics, if things fall well for them, like it's a perfect run, a great run, they can hit good numbers, because Wild Hunters and Pathfinders specifically have high peaks. And when there's like a perfect run, a good time, or like a, no deaths, good orb RNG, good lucid, minimum mini games, these classes can absolutely pop off. I saw Wild Hunter do 350 bill DPM in lucid because their peaks are so high. And I think that's what you'll notice with a lot of these classes. They have the potential, right? But they also have the potential, if things don't go well, to kind of fall back compared to other classes, right? But I think that's what makes it exciting, right? Same for Buccaneers, same for Thunderbreakers. When things are going great, the first 15 seconds, they're going to spike. Their DPS is going to be insane. They're going to do, top the charts. They got great instant burst. But when things get a little hectic, a little, out of the ordinary, they don't really have a lot to respond. But the fact that they can top the charts, the fact that they can do great DPS, they both have great mobility, the fact that they're in the A+ tier, it says a lot about them, right? Buccaneers are extremely underrated. Buccaneers in Fort are carrying our server to victory single-handedly because of their burst and their mobility. Thunderbreakers I've seen them holding aggro, doing top DPS since remaster, right? It's only trickling down and getting better post V4 and rebalance. So definitely some of the stronger pirates in the game, but I think we'll find out that they're just a tier below other pirates and other classes that in some situations, right? And then I got these next 4 mages. And I just think mages are in a tough spot because that they don't have great oh shit buttons, right? They just have ethereal form. Evan's mages have an iframe, right? I think Lumi's have an iframe, but it's a stun. Blaze Wizards don't even have a teleport. They got a long teleport, but Fire Poison mages just have ethereal form. Blaze Wizards have a short, their hyper is an iframe, right? They're very good. Can produce great burst. All 4 classes. I've gotten reviews. I've gotten into discussions about these 4 classes being the best mage. DPS wise. Fire Poison Mage in EU. 7-set Absol, carrying them. Right? Lumi's been carrying since day 1. Evans. Tazo in Rubido's guild. Absolutely keeping up. DPS wise. Doing great burst, great DPS. Geminis. Blaze Wizards. I've seen people say that they are top 10 class. Can't argue, right? I can't argue with people that say these are all great classes because they are. Absolutely. I think for me is I just have this feeling in the game that mages are squishy. They just are. Obviously, they're still A+. But I just think other classes, warriors and thieves specifically, are just a little bit more, have better toolkits. No shame on these guys. Lumis, Evans, their DPS has definitely come back to the norm compared to pre-rebalance, but still very good in my opinion. And then the last 2, Blaster and Heroes. Heroes have the potential to be huge, to do big damage. They just, their DPS is very good. I think that they've always been sort of bossing machines. They cap very easily. They do good consistent damage, good mobility. They have iframes to work with. Ethereal Form. They have their World Reaver. They have Blitz Shield. They have options, right? Absolutely. Blasters as well. Mini iframes within their rotation. I had them undervalued before. I think this is a good spot for them. Their DPS seems back. It seems good. Very good. Right? Much easier, not clunky. A few presets here and there. Good mobility, good survivability. A bit of micromanaging compared to other warriors specifically. But I think that there's a little bit less top tier blasters. But from what I've heard, shout out to the blaster Marble that helped me. But kind of gave me insight on them. But yeah, I think blasters, I've been undervaluing them, kind of overlooking them for a long time. I think that they're in the right spot now. Again, competitive. And when you have a toolkit, you have iframes that you can use kind of on demand. That just makes it so much easier to kind of do consistent damage, right? And that's kind of what it's all about. And then now we're going to get into the S tier. And this tier is, in my opinion, the best classes. that have the best. I think these classes are better than the S plus classes, but their burst damage is just not as good, but it's still very good. But on top of that, they also have a great toolkit. They have options, whether it's leeching, whether it's iframes, a combination of both. They have good, they have things to do when shit hits the fan, when they need to survive, when they have to, when, things aren't going perfectly. And if things are going perfectly, they are going to even shine even more, right? And I got them as the tier that will outlive the S plus tier for sure. Probably the tier that these classes will survive the longest. That will be the last one standing. Kind of if, there's no lives left, a few people are alive, it's going to be these classes most likely. All right, guys, that was the end of part 1 of the class tier ranking. Stay tuned for part 2. Let me know in the comments what you agree with, disagree with. I'm sure a lot of you guys obviously have different opinions on the bishops, the Sias, the shades, and probably some of the DPS classes all together. So let me know in the comments below. And I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts, because this is kind of what it's all about, just having discussions and learning. Because I, for one, do not think that my list is going to match anyone else's list. If you've made a list and ranked your classes, I guarantee you it does not look like mine. And I guarantee you it doesn't look like the person next to you, especially in this bottom tier. So let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to join Discord. That's where all the discussions are going to be had. And if you want to participate in the polls and stuff like that, yeah, that's where it's all going to be. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for part 2. It's coming up real soon.